Welcome you. I'm Bob Cattell, and I have the honor of being the chairman of the Advanced Energy Research Technology Center out of Stony Brook University. And you'll get an official welcome to Governor's Island in a few minutes, but let me welcome you to Governor's Island, the site of the climate exchange, and you'll hear more about that in a little bit. But before I get into my prepared remarks, I've probably told every one of you in the room this story by now, but if you haven't, you'll hear it again. Back in, I guess it was about 30 years ago, Brooklyn Union was a gas company in those days, and we got a call from the Coast Guard. And the Coast Guard said they wanted to bring gas onto Governor's Island, and Brooklyn was relatively close, so I said, what a great idea, we're going to do it. And then our sister utility in Manhattan found out about it, and they said, well, we think Governor's Island is in our territory. So now the lawyers were talking to each other, and you know how long that would have taken to get straightened out? So I called Gene McGrath, the then CEO of Con Ed, who was a good friend, and I said, Gene, why don't we do a 50-50 joint venture, and we can both benefit? He said, that sounds like a great idea. So we told the lawyers to do that. That's how we bought gas here on Governor's Island. So it works. Sometimes it's better to collaborate than to fight, right? But seriously, it's a great place, and you'll be hearing more about it. And it's really a pleasure to be here. It's truly a fitting location to have the discussion that we're going to talk about, looking at the critical challenges that are facing New York City and the entire region, a lot from Long Island here, having to do with the energy transition. The other thing I want to mention, I see a lot of longtime friends. I never say old friends because I'm probably the oldest guy here, but it's great to see so many longtime friends in the room that I haven't seen in a long time. Gentleman I'm looking at, he's smiling at me, a gentleman named Bob Curry. Bob and I go back more years than I'd like to remember. And yeah, and he said me too. But the nice thing about it, he was actually on the New York State Public Service Commission, and we still talk to each other in spite of that, Bob. But it's great. And the conversation that was going on before we started is what this place, and you'll hear more, is really all about. People in the energy space talking to each other. We're obviously in the center of a global city that's constantly evolving. Don't have to say too much about New York. And we are constantly reminded of the tremendous role that energy plays in our lives, powering our businesses and transportation systems. At the Advanced Energy Research and Technology Center, our mission has always been to develop and deploy innovative energy solutions that will help New York lead the way in sustainability. And you all know about the great environmental goals that New York State has set. Today, we're at a pivotal moment. The region's energy landscape is rapidly shifting, and with that comes both opportunity and responsibility. First, we must address the need for grid modernization. As we move towards more renewable energy sources like solar, wind, battery storage, our aging infrastructure requires significant upgrades. Ensuring that we can transmit and store energy efficiently and affordably is crucial to meet our climate goals. Second, we face the challenge of energy equity. We talk more and more about this every year. The energy transition must be inclusive, ensuring that all communities, especially underserved and vulnerable populations, benefit from cleaner, more reliable, and affordable energy. By working together, we can ensure that no one is left behind in this transition. Third, we need to address the energy transition, mitigating the impacts of climate changes, such as severe weather events and rising sea levels, by continuing to introduce renewable energy alternatives. This will not only help slow or even combat these extreme weather incidences, but also foster economic growth and job creation. And finally, it's probably not finally, there's probably a lot of other things, but we must recognize the role of innovation and collaboration in solving these challenges. New York City has always been a hub of innovation, and with the right partnerships between government, academia, and industry, we can create solutions that not only meet the needs of today, but also anticipate the demands of tomorrow. And I know a lot of you in the room are involved in innovation and new technologies. On this note, I'm proud to say that Stony Brook University is honored to serve as an anchor institution for the development of climate solutions, the Climate Solutions Center right here on Governor's Island. This initiative represents a bold step toward positioning New York as a global leader in climate resilience and sustainability. Together with our partners, we're excited to contribute our research and expertise to help drive the innovations needed for a cleaner and more resilient future. Whether through advancements in offshore wind development, energy storage, grid resiliency, or sustainable infrastructure, the path to a sustainable future requires all of us to be involved and committed. I'm proud to represent the AERTC and Stony Brook University today as we continue to work towards an energy future that is cleaner, more reliable, and equitable for all New Yorkers. I look forward to the insights and discussions we'll share today as we continue to work together to build the energy systems of the future. So before we get into some of our other speakers, I'd like to introduce a number of people that are in the room here today, VIPs. You're all VIPs, but some deserve a little special recognition. So I'll introduce them and then I'll ask them to stand. First, I'd like to introduce Kevin Gardner. Kevin is the Vice President for Research at Stony Brook. Kevin, all right. Kevin is relatively new, brings a new perspective, and it's a pleasure to be working with you, Kevin. Mike Kinch is Chief Innovation Officer and is also involved in economic development. Michael, over there. Also relatively new, and again, nice to see you. We have David Hamilton. David Hamilton's got a number of titles. Interim Center Director for CIESS, Director for Ecosystems Growth and Impact, and Economic Development. David? And then we have the pleasure of having with us today Kevin Reed. Kevin is the Chief Climate Scientist at the New York Climate Exchange and is also a faculty at SOMASC. Kevin, where are you? You're here somewhere? Kevin is on the way on the ferry. Okay, all right. And last but not least, the gentleman who really put this conference together is Jim Acquavita. Jim is the Center Director of the AERTC, and he is here also. Jim, where are you? There he is. Jim. Great job putting this together. Wasn't easy when he was told, I got to do a conference on Governor's Island. He said, I got to do what? In addition to all the other things I'm doing? But you did a great job. Right. Okay. Are there any other members of the advisory board? I know I saw Jeff. Where's Jeff from IBM is here. Any other members? Jeff? Jeff, stand up. Any other members of the advisory board here today? That's it. Okay. All right. So now we're going to get into the other speakers. As I mentioned, this event offers an opportunity to see climate collaboration in action. Leading the way for the New York City Climate Exchange at Governor's Island, and who's going to make a few remarks, is Dr. Stephen Hammer. Stephen is the founding CEO of the Climate Exchange, a first-of-its-kind collaborative model for accelerating climate change solutions for New York City and beyond. Prior to joining the exchange, Dr. Hammer spent a decade at the World Bank, where he served as Senior Policy Advisor on urban-scale climate solutions and global climate policy and finance. So it's my pleasure to introduce Stephen Hammer. Stephen?
Thank you very much, everybody. I'm going to apologize. What you're getting this morning is the voice that usually happens at the end of Climate Week. I just reversed course this year. I'm going to make a couple of points. This is the third day that we've had access to this building, and it has been filled every day, and that just thrills me to no end, because it basically gives life to the idea that a Center for Climate Solutions that can bring different perspectives, academia, industry, the community, government together to have conversations about how we move forward in a productive way, that you can do that. And that was the vision that the City of New York had and the Trust for Governor's Island had in trying to build a Center for Climate Solutions here on the island. And it was with the leadership of Stony Brook University, along with other partners, and we have a total of 48 partners in this consortium, 12 academic institutions, IBM, Moody's, and BCG representing corporate perspectives, and then we have 33 community organizations from around New York, the Museum of Natural History, 5 chambers of commerce, environmental justice groups, workforce groups. And what is fascinating when you get this group together and you begin to really dig into how do you move the needle on climate policy, finance, what do we need to know more of, and then how do we share that in terms of climate science? The conversations go from the abstract to the issues that you work with every day. the practical stuff. How do you take care of the challenges that your companies are facing in terms of the realities of policy, the realities of finance and the cost of capital, community opposition or community support for new and different ideas? And the exchange is built around how do you bring that together on a regular basis to talk about all things climate. This morning it'll be energy. This afternoon it'll be resilience. Tomorrow we'll be in this building tomorrow. We have 25 climate tech startups here to talk to New York and the finance world about what they're trying to do, and panel discussions focused on how do we move that sector forward. So it's an extraordinarily exciting week for us. We're not just doing things here in the building. We call it, just so you know, we call this place the Climate Chapel. It used to be Our Lady Star of the Sea Catholic Church, serving the military base that was on the island. But with the support from the trust, we've been able to convert this into our first convening facility that will make active use over the next several years. Eventually, we'll build a much more elaborate complex on the island that'll have educational programming. We'll be bringing Stony Brook and other students to our campus here for undergraduate coursework, graduate coursework. We'll have research laboratories on the island. We'll have a tech incubator on the island. And then we'll have space to do more of this. And we're really excited about that idea of bringing these things together in a single location because, you know, one of the notions that we've had is that if policymakers who are saying, we're hung up on this, and then they can walk over literally across the courtyard and say, hey, we've got some engineers, we've got some scientists we can talk to. You can bring them together. And then you've got tech startups who will be, again, right next door, and we can bring them into the conversation. All of a sudden, policymakers who may have been stuck on an idea begin to get a sense of there is a path forward. There are opportunities. Our ambition can go higher, or the speed with which we want to try and move can actually accelerate. So we won't set targets 10 years into the future. We'll set targets 2 years or 5 years into the future. So that co-location function is critical to what we're trying to do. Again, the notion is you bring the right people into the room, you give them access to experts of all kinds, and you bring students here so that they can get exposed to all of this and be a part of this ecosystem. So we're building that next generation of leaders. Again, that's the kind of ideas that the leadership of Stony Brook University and our other academic and corporate and community partners had in creating the exchange. So I am thrilled to welcome you today. I love seeing a full house on a morning I'm going to be real honest, you know, people were saying, we're not sure this kind of thing can work on Governor's Island, but here you are. And it's been this way for 3 days now. We have 800 people who've signed up for the tech showcase tomorrow. So we're going to have a line out the door of people who want to get in and hear about where the world is moving, what those opportunities are. So thank you for coming today. Thank you to the Energy Research Center, Bob, and my friends at Stony Brook. I was out there many months ago as I did my rounds, meeting all the partners. And it is one of those experiences for me. I'm a former academic, but you know, when you begin to understand who your partners are and what resources they bring to the table, that's when your optimism about what we're able to do at the exchange gets really exciting. And so thank you to the Energy Research Center for what you're bringing here today. Thanks very much.
And thank you, Stephen, for your leadership. We look forward to working with you. I have to give a proper introduction to my good friend, Jeff Katz. Jeff, I just said Jeff because I think of it as Jeff, but Jeff is with IBM. And stand up again, Jeff, because they've been a member of the Energy Center Board from the beginning, Jeff, and really contribute. Thank you. Thank you for being here. Okay, at this time, I'd like to call Stony Brook University's interim president, Richard L. McCormick, to the podium to say a few words of welcome. Stony Brook University is an internationally recognized flagship research institution ranked as the #1 public university in the state of New York. Dr. McCormick was appointed in August of 2024, so he's relatively new. He has a long career, though, in education. He also, in addition to the university, he oversees Long Island's premier academic healthcare system, Stony Brook Medicine, and serves as co-chair of the board of the New York Climate Exchange, a historic partnership, as was mentioned, anchored by Stony Brook University to build an international climate solution centers on Governor Islands. Please let me welcome Dr. McCormick.
Thank you, Bob, for that kind introduction and for your kind words about Stony Brook. Steve, thank you for that as well. So good morning. It's a great pleasure to be here on Governor's Island. It's my first ever visit to Governor's Island, though I've spent most of my life just a couple of stone throws away in New Jersey. I'm glad to be here for the first time. So on behalf of Stony Brook and the Advanced Energy Research and Technology Center at Stony Brook University, I want to thank all of you for being here this morning. Ahead of us is a full slate of workshops and talks, but before that, I want to say a few words about how pleased and proud Stony Brook is to be the anchor institution for the Climate Exchange and to celebrate our work together. Nowhere is the connection between knowledge and education and addressing critical environmental issues more clear than through Stony Brook's work and our partnership with the New York Climate Exchange. We've brought together scholars, researchers, government, environmental justice organizations, business leaders, and other key stakeholders in pursuit of developing and deploying solutions to our global climate crisis, while also serving as a hub for New Yorkers to benefit from a rapidly evolving green economy. We're proud of Stony Brook's role in this important endeavor. We're proud that our own Professor Kevin Reed, I think he may be still on the ferry, or maybe he's just arrived. Hi, Kevin. Has recently been named the inaugural Chief Climate Scientist for the New York Climate Exchange. We have a long history, we at Stony Brook have a long history of research and education mitigating the causes of climate change and exploring new, cleaner sources of energy. The Advanced Energy Research and Technology Center at Stony Brook is New York's only center of excellence in energy and has been conducting groundbreaking research since its founding nearly 20 years ago. Today, the Center of Excellence is a hub of knowledge needed to transition our world to renewable sources of energy, bringing new technologies to the market and educating students broadly who will be the ones to tackle the grand challenges we face. And may I say, having begun to get to know our Stony Brook students, they are excited, they are jazzed, they're deeply concerned about the environment, and many of them want to make a difference in their lives. So they came to the right place, and we're going to engage them in the work of the Climate Exchange as well. Our students, faculty, and staff and partners enable Stony Brook to continue making progress toward developing and deploying critical climate solutions. And as I've said already, we're so proud to collaborate with the New York Climate Exchange to achieve this goal. So I look forward to hearing more today in our talks and workshops, the important work for the Exchange, Stony Brook, and all of the important partners here today. This is our moment to address the critical environmental challenges, and there's no place better, no stronger partnership to do so than this one right here. Thank you for being here this morning.
Steps are a little shaky there. Thank you again, Dr. McCormick. We look forward to Stony Brook moving forward under your leadership, and we certainly welcome you here. We don't mind people from New Jersey coming to New York every once in a while. As long as we can beat the teams, although our two football teams play in New Jersey, as you know. So, as was mentioned, Kevin Reed is here. Kevin, I gave you an introduction before you came, but Kevin is mentioned as the Chief Climate Scientist at the New York Climate Exchange and is also faculty in SOMA, so welcome, Kevin. Give him a shout out. Yeah, there you go. Okay, our next speaker is Kathleen Schmidt. Kathleen serves as Deputy Executive Director of the Mayor's Office of Climate and Environmental Justice, where she leads the Resilient and Efficient Buildings, Clean Energy, and Operations team. Before joining, she served as Senior Director for Strategic Planning in the Division of Energy Management at the city's Department of Citywide Administrative Services, where she led policy, strategic communications, and compliance supporting the city's work to decarbonize its assets and operations and catalyze the development of clean energy infrastructure serving New York. So it's my pleasure to welcome Kathleen Schmidt. Kathleen?
Good morning, everybody. And a huge thanks to Governor's Island and the Climate Exchange for hosting us, and for Stony Brook. I can't be more proud that we get such an amazing institution under the banner of New York, but also the banner of public education to really lead climate thinking in New York State. Could everyone here raise your hands if you are a visitor to New York City for Climate Week and don't live or work here on a regular basis? All right. So I'm going to really selfishly use this time to run through some of the really transformative work that my colleagues in New York City are doing to address the climate crisis, but also flag places where New York City can't do it on our own, and we need to take advantage of the partnerships here in this room to really make the transformative difference. You know, I know this is a group of people that's spending all day, every day, thinking about the questions that are on the table and really grappling with how to transform the country's most complex, densest urban environment to be prepared for a climate future. And, you know, that's the job of our office. I know New York City doesn't make it easy to do a lot of work. And so I just want to start my remarks with an invitation to all of you to be in touch with us. We are the ones here to help climate innovators work through New York City bureaucracy or connect the dots between our multiple agencies that are embedded in this work. We are here to be the ones to really think through policy solutions, regulatory reform. How can we start a conversation to make it easier to do the work that we all need to do? And we're also here to make sure that the work that this collective group is pulling forward really aligns with the needs and priorities of our communities. And in particular, the needs and priorities of our environmental justice communities, the communities that have been disenfranchised historically and really need to be first and foremost in the conversation and have a seat at the table. So with that, you know, I think we all need to bucket our climate challenge. We need to really make sure that we're focused on the discrete questions. And so just for the purposes of organizing my thoughts, I've identified a handful of buckets that New York City is really being active in. So first, it's how do we get clean energy to New York City? The second is how do we transform the energy infrastructure in New York City to not just be not just result in fewer greenhouse gas emissions, but also be cleaner, be cheaper, to make sure it stays reliable, and to make sure that our investments in our energy infrastructure really improve the quality of life in neighborhoods and don't just transfer fuel uses. The third is how do we transform our buildings and the building systems that use energy, again, to really improve the places where New Yorkers live and work, in addition to reducing our greenhouse gas emissions. And then finally, how do we transform our transit systems to take cars off the road and to electrify vehicles, not just passenger vehicles, but the large vehicles that serve New Yorkers and make the city run. So, New York City is uniquely positioned. We don't hold all the levers, but we are at an important place in the conversation. You know, first of all, we are the front line to talking to our communities. Our elected officials, the work that our agencies does, embedded in communities to actually provide services and resources. We don't always do a perfect job. In fact, frequently we don't, but we are the ones like really embedded in our neighborhoods and elevating the priorities and the proposed solutions that are coming out of the grassroots. And I think that's an important role that New York City needs to play when we're working with other levels of government as well as other types of institutions and the private sector. We also operate a significant amount of the infrastructure that serves New Yorkers. We operate the ambulances, we keep the roadways safe. We rely on energy. We need that energy to be affordable. And we have a fundamental understanding of how complex infrastructure in New York City is. We also have taken real-world action to solve climate change in New York City. You know, we are not just passing regulations that need to apply to multiple different geographies or asset types. We have shovels in the ground doing the work. We have 40 city agencies that each have their unique role in the climate fight. And we take that lived experience every day to the policies and rules and laws that we pass to help guide the private sector action. And then finally, we are a vocal participant at the state and federal level to help advocate for strong climate policy informed by this very unique role that we play. So let's just get into it, like rapid fire. How do we bring clean energy into New York City? I think New York City has played a transformative role. We have entered into a contract with NYSERDA to purchase Tier 4 RECs that really serve to catalyze and get off the ground the Champlain Hudson Power Express Clean Path New York. We are using our pocketbook to bring clean energy to the city. It will benefit all New Yorkers, but we also are using these two transmission lines to ensure that city government operations are powered by 100% clean electricity. We also are using our unique position as a landowner to support the offshore wind industry. We are actively developing and in fact entering into construction in the South Brooklyn Marine Terminal to both provide an interconnection location but also a construction staging and support space for the various offshore wind projects, and first and foremost for Equinor. And we are so excited that we get to work in partnership, but also are using that special position to make sure that we are building a workforce of New York City residents and deploying that workforce for a clean energy future. We've also created a transmission permitting working group to help make sure that these projects have access to the folks in city government they need to make sure that the construction work runs on time. We know it's hard to work in New York City streets, and we want to make sure that we are prioritizing the right projects and connecting the dots with the city agencies that are essential to making sure that that construction doesn't interfere with the essential services that we bring to New Yorkers in the operation of our infrastructure. So that work has already made a huge difference in expediting the permitting process and the approvals process for those projects. So where do we need help? So first, we really appreciate the work that New York State has done to roll with the punches as we all continue to try to get the offshore wind projects off the ground. We need more creativity, and we need to really keep our foot on the gas, but also to be pragmatic and responsive to the industry. We also need to create a much more robust market for climate solutions. We need to create a viable financing pathway for energy storage in New York City so that we can use our property levers to get projects built. We need to create the structures that we have for offshore wind, for solar, in order to really make these types of projects financially viable because of the headwinds that everyone faces in New York City at our cost of construction and expense. And then finally, we need to really think about how to solve the congestion problem of bringing a renewable power from upstate down into the city. I think we are so excited that Champlain Hudson is in construction. We are working diligently to get Clean Path there, but it's only going to be a piece of the solution as we continue to electrify and thinking about energy as a holistic state challenge, I think, is something that everyone's getting a little better at, but there's a lot more work to be done to make sure that New York City's grid starts to match the performance of upstate's grid, but recognizing the city doesn't make these decisions. And so we and our own climate mandates are really dependent on the work of the state in bringing these projects to fruition. So how do we then transform our infrastructure in the city? I have mixed up my notes. First of all, we have passed City for Carbon Neutrality. We have passed a really transformative change to our zoning resolution to increase the footprint that battery storage can be built as of right, to increase the footprint of solar projects, and so many other things to really use our land use levers to create viable space for larger energy projects. We also are really looking at how to leverage city-owned property for energy storage systems. And I'm like so excited to convey that we are working in partnership with NYPA through DCAS Energy Management and the city's Department of Environmental Protection, build energy storage on city-owned property alongside the work that we've done for years with NYPA to install solar on roofs. And so we're really looking at how do we use our procurement power, how do we use our property ownership to find space for energy projects amidst the infrastructure that serves New Yorkers. We, though, need to continue to think about the gas grid, right? How do we focus on specific geographies in disadvantaged communities to make proof of concept investments that district thermal can work, that electrification can work, and to, like I said, make sure that these investments really improve these spaces for New Yorkers. And I think that only when we connect the dots between the investments in the buildings and the infrastructure in the ground are we going to start to really get projects done. But we need help from the innovators to advance these ideas and help navigate the city's bureaucracy to get these ideas going. And then finally, how do we decarbonize our buildings in the private sector is really like looking at our local law 97. We were amongst the first jurisdictions in the country to implement a building performance standard, and we are in the first compliance year. The city provides wraparound technical support through the New York City Accelerator and is a loud advocate to bring resources to buildings, whether they be financing tools from the private sector or utility and government incentives and grant programs. Like, we need more financial products to make local law 97 work. We also need flexible pathways to make sure buildings create decarbonization plans into the future. But fundamentally, we need our buildings to decarbonize, and getting hung up in the details of the path forward, I think, needs to be complemented by a recognition that we have to decarbonize our buildings and we have to invest in our buildings. New York City is the city it is because we continue to transform spaces, use them for new things, and adapt them to modern life. And we can do that in this space. But for any of you who are on your co-op board or have a landlord that has to comply with Local Law 97, be vocal early about contacting the accelerator, working with innovators, and figuring out a path forward. And then on transportation, we are, I forgot one thing. We also need the City Council to pass J51. Our office is working across the state and the city to find new financial tools and develop new financial tools. The one that's right in front of our face is J51, which is a tax abatement that allows low and moderate income residential buildings to invest in their buildings. That includes energy investments that reduce utility costs. And that is the first step in providing these resources. So we need to bring our attention to the multiple levels of government that really are important to make a difference. I only have a couple minutes, so I'm going to skip transportation, but I'm happy to take questions on that. And I really mean it. I want you to have conversations today that tell us how we can do our jobs better. Tell us how we can help you transform New York City. And I'm happy to answer any questions. I also have two colleagues in the room, Lydia and Amy, who can answer questions about our office, and just appreciate everyone's time here today. Thank you.
Thank you, Kathleen, for those remarks and to identify some of the problems and the solutions. I invite you to take Kathleen up on her invitation to reach out to her if there's any issues that you want to discuss with New York City. She's identified herself as the go-to person, so thank you for doing that. Thank you for being here. Pleasure. Okay, our next speaker is Carter Strickland. Carter is the Chief Sustainability Officer and Executive Director of Climate Action at the State University of New York, which spans 64 campuses, including 3 teaching hospitals, and educates 1.3 million students. I didn't go to SUNY, I went to City College. They do pretty good also. With over 30 years of experience across government, nonprofit, and private sectors, Carter has been a leader on developing strategic visions and implementing tangible solutions to environmental issues, and is a recognized subject matter expert in water, air, energy, natural climate solutions, climate risk assessment, and green businesses development, with a proven track record of driving organizational change, creating partnerships and policies, and building infrastructure. So it's my pleasure to introduce Carter Strickland. Carter.
Thank you, Bob. And I will say it was a pleasure working with your companies on oil to gas conversions in New York City 20 years ago now, which saved a lot of lives and maybe is a precursor for what we could do. Put that down there. So good morning, all. And I want to thank the Climate Exchange at Governor's Island for bringing us all together. In particular, I want to emphasize the Climate Exchange is focused on urban solutions and issues. You know, it's where 70% of world emissions come from, and we really do need to bring urban issues to the fore. I think we're seeing that happen at COP, which is very exciting. But even locally, it's important, and I will say that among many of you who know New York well, state and city, it's not always the case that the city and the state are in the same room or talking the same language or working on the same issues. So I think that's a service that I'm looking forward to the Climate Exchange providing. But now there are many of us who work for the state who grew up working on city issues and have that perspective. So I do think there's a time to do it. I'm going to mention a few points and then look forward to the table discussions. First, we clearly need to decarbonize our economy, and we can do it. I mean, I think there's a little fatalism out there that we certainly have to address with our students, but I do want to spend a little time acknowledging that the electricity generation sector in particular has become so much cleaner over the last 34 years since the measuring benchmark year of 1990, and it's something to really celebrate and also draw some lessons from. If you think about the grid in 1990, which is, again, that baseline, certainly New York is blessed with water resources, and the hydro has been a great part of that story. The hydro plant in Niagara Falls was the largest in the world when it opened in 1961, so we used to have big infrastructure solutions, and we need them again. 40% of the grid, if you include nuclear, was clean, emission-free, but we still had 60% to go from coal, gas, oil. But we have to look at one of the first, kind of an untold story or underappreciated story is, let's call it the name, the carbon tax that we had in the Northeast through RGGI. It's a great story, and the Financial Times actually had a story today quoting the director of the World Trade Organization that there are now 78 carbon emission pricing mechanisms, as they call it, covering 25% of emissions through the world. That's up from 5% in 2010. And it's really been a great story. Starting in 2014 when the RGGI states set a cap, and then they've reduced it 2.5% and 3% a year. It's been a steady decline in carbon emissions from the power sector, also aided greatly by another market mechanism, cheap frack gas, which displaced a lot of the oil in New York City, but also displaced coal and oil in the generation market. And so that has been a great story. And let's look at the results here. In 1990, the electric power generation market in New York State generated 64 million metric tons of CO2. This is GWP 20 calculations. In 21, which is the last year I have, That was down from 64 to 26 million metric tons. It's a 60% reduction. It's really astounding. So we know from the Montreal Protocol, with ozone destroying chemicals to now carbon, the market mechanisms work. Certainly there's been some growth in solar and wind. It provides a tenth of the state's total electric generation. It also has to be acknowledged that that's been offset by the closure of Indian Point. So we have to do more so that solar and wind are displacing fossil fuels and not just taking up slack. But we are third in the nation in electricity generated from small-scale solar, and there are also 400 utility-scale solar PV installations in New York. So there's some good stories. Certainly the wind market needs to catch up, and we need to do more and faster. We're nowhere close to realizing the tremendous potential which will be tapped for the Great Lakes shoreline and also the Atlantic Ocean shorelines, which have some of the world's best wind resources. Beyond electricity, the lagging sectors are clearly buildings that burn fuel for heat, as Katie mentioned, and cars that burn fuel to move. So in contrast to the 60% reduction I mentioned, using the same table, which is in the state's greenhouse gas report, the most recent report, the building sector had about 66 million metric tons of CO2e in 1990, and now it's to 60. It's a decrease, but only 9%. It's not enough. The transportation sector had 70 million metric tons of CO2e in 1990, and now has about 68. That's a 2.5% reduction. It's not good enough. And so we have to think about what mechanisms worked in the electricity generation market that we can bring to bear for buildings and for cars. It's harder because many of these sectors are consumer driven, but we have grants from the RGGI proceeds, also system benefit charge, of course, that are being plowed into it. And we know that taking action is popular. And my proof point there is that for those of you who are New York residents, in 2022, you had an opportunity to vote and tax yourself for what's called a Bond Act, Clean Air, Clean Water, and Green Jobs Bond Act of 2022. It passed with a 67% vote at the ballot. That means it crossed party lines. It means an overwhelming majority of New Yorkers were voting to take climate action. And it's not just taxing themselves. We know, for example, let's look at heat pumps. Many New Yorkers are already heating and cooling with cold climate heat pumps. Over the last 2 years, my 2 years being 22 and 23, there's 65,000 installed across the state. And we know that nationally, heat pump sales are outselling gas generation, heating elements in buildings. Solar installations, we now have over 160,000 installed in New York. So people are taking action. We know that nationally, EV sales are 8% of all new sales. And in New York, over the last few years, we have had about 70,000 original electric vehicle registrations. So people are willing to take action, and we need to tap into that expertise. All right. What's the role of SUNY? If you think about SUNY, and you heard about the 1.3 million students we also have 80,000 faculty and staff. So if you put all that together collectively, with not only the second biggest city in New York, but if you look nationally, we're a top 50 city. We're spread out over 64 campuses, but play with me a little bit here. A top 50 city by population is bigger than Minneapolis, New Orleans, but also a top 70 city by density. We're more walkable and bikeable than Portland, St. Louis, or Denver. Denver, at least, and Portland have great biking systems, and so we can get folks out of cars. And we have a number of drivers as a state agency that we have to contend with and should be in advance of what the larger society in general has to comply with. One, of course, is the Climate Leadership and Community Protection Act of 2019, but there's an executive order that asks state agencies to accelerate faster. It's Executive Order 22. And so we're doing that. We already have had a 36% reduction in our Scope 1 and 2 greenhouse gas emissions since 1990, driven in part by a substantial decrease in energy use and adoption of clean buildings. We now have 55 LEED certified buildings across the system. And looking forward to the future, we have, for all of our state-operated campuses, we have 29, we have clean energy master plans that are charting a really practical path forward for an 85% reduction in our greenhouse gases, which we're calling net zero. We'll make up the 15% difference somewhere. But they're largely calling for a solution of geothermal ground source heat pumps with thermal energy networks, some air source heat pumps for buildings that are hard to reach, and additional local generation from solar with some backup from gas generation. We already have 16 campuses that use geothermal heating and cooling, so we're past the pilot stage. We're at the scale-up stage. That's where we are. Little old Sullivan County Community College has had geothermal heat pumps for 20 years. It's a cold place, they work, and you know, they don't have a huge infrastructure to support that. On the fleet, 10% of our fleet is EVs. We're going to get to 100% for the light-duty fleet by 2030. And the charging ports have a way to go, but we have over 300 in our system. You know, when I think about it, when we put all these pieces together, we know that decarbonization overall is going to be a price tag for us alone of $20 to $30 billion. That's over 20 plus years. It's not going to happen at once. And it couldn't happen at once for continuity of operations. It's going to happen over time. But if we put the pieces together from our campuses, we can see what the future will look like. It will include net zero buildings like we have at the E-Tech building at the University of Albany, or a National Grid building we have at Suffolk County Community College that are already net zero, but those will be networked together at a campus level. They'll be built with mass timber like we have at SUNY ESF up in Syracuse, or locally here at Maritime, brand new mass timber building, small one, but a building nonetheless. It will include a thermal energy network like we're building at SUNY Oswego. It will include PV with a battery grant like we're installing right now at Oneonta with the Department of Energy grant. And putting all this together will get to where we need to go. And again, we view ourselves as a mini city conceptually, and so we can prove that these systems work in a location, in a city that has one owner. So instead of negotiating with different landowners to build a thermal energy network and the cost of giving therms and taking therms, we can prove that it works, and then the business model could be worked out later. All right, on to challenges and opportunities for emerging issues. We know that focused efforts can produce results. Looking to the West Coast, California now regularly meets 100% of its electricity demand from renewable sources, but with the intermittency issue, of course, it still has to use fossil fuels. So solving that storage is really, really critical. We also have to account for the growth in electricity demand. We might be going up, to 204 million megawatt hours in 2040, driven by cars. We now have legislation, both the federal level and the state level, requiring the transition to zero-emission vehicles. We know our building heating load is going to transition over to electricity use, and so we might be getting to peak use in the winter, not the summer. And then finally, New York is making big bets on AI and data processing. That is going to require a substantial amount of power that we hope is clean. We certainly need to make sure that the electricity network is reliable. We have 4 to 5 events a year in New York State that cause $1 billion or more in damage. And we need to make sure we have continuity of operations. And finally, we have to work on the cost. The cost of electricity needs to be developed in a way that it doesn't fall on the users who are just not going to be able to pay for it, and the system will be stalled. So with that, I'm looking forward to the conversations at the table, and thank you for listening to me this morning. Thank you.
Thank you, Carter. Very interesting statistics, and thank you for all that you're doing at SUNY. And I think there may be some models there that the rest of us can learn from. So thank you very much. Our next speaker is Dr. Andrew Coleman. Andrew, or Andy, is Executive Director of Government Capture and Corporate Affairs at the Electric Power Research Institute, affectionately known as EPRI, where he leads strategy and business development opportunities. Coleman held positions as Senior Technical Executive, Senior Program Manager, and Account Executive. During a hiatus from EPRI, Coleman was appointed the Director of Energy Systems Engineering at Lehigh University. So he went over to the academic side for a while at the Rawson College of Engineering and Applied Science. Andrew's areas of technical expertise, and he said it's more than this, but structural geology, geothermal sciences, and environmental remediation. It's my pleasure to welcome Andrew.
Okay, I'm gonna break this up a little bit, a little more technical presentation. So I think we have slides, right? Do we have the slides loaded? I thought we had slides loaded. Okay, that's all right. So over at EPRI, we're a nonprofit R&D company, and we have been working towards all the things we've been talking about in this particular event. One of the interesting facts that we have at the beginning of our sorry guys, I'm a little tired. But back in 1972, we had a blackout in New York City, and during that period of time, Congress came over to EPRI and said, we need to get more resilience in the system. So at that time, EPRI was born as a third-party R&D institute, and at that point, most of our work was foundational around the problems that are societal in nature. So what we've been working on at EPRI through many years of work on the renewables is we've come to this point where we just talked about the issues in California, and yes, we can reach 100% renewables at any given point in the day. However, we have a large transect of, I would say, we call the Duck Canyon, where we have a makeup amount of power that's needed, anywhere that can swing from 3 to 6 megawatts. And this is problematic because after we got rid of songs, it was a large issue. So now we look at New York City, and I was going to talk, I thought we were going to have slides, but I was going to talk a little more about geothermal. So that's fine. So my expertise is really around hot rock. I've been working in geothermal sciences for the past 20 years in Japan, helping to build power plants, helping to improve efficiencies, water efficiencies, and then trying to really look at how to sustain net zero. In fact, a net zero environment with clean, firm power. And one of the things that we look at also in Southern California is we actually look at the profile of geothermal, and it provides almost like base load power. So what I was going to show you is some slides on that. I think that New York State is a really great candidate. We talked a little bit about this. We have this very interesting paradigm that was set up by Google, and it was about 7 or 8 years ago where Google had come to Central Hudson and also the NYSERDA, and they started transforming by taking out some of the underground storage tanks and replacing with ground source geothermal. This was ingenious. It was a little difficult in the drilling aspects because there you have a lot of glacial till, it's hard to get through some of that, but nonetheless, they've been able to convince customers to switch over to ground source geothermal, go over to heat pumps like we were talking about, and this has become a really great resource. Now, out west, where I live, we have a lot of district heating. We also have very large geothermal power plants. I'm dealing with any time, at any given time, wells that could be drilled to maybe up to 2 kilometers deep and yielding 50 megawatts. But what's really important to think about here in the state of New York is that even at 90 degrees Celsius or 120 degrees Celsius below ground surface, you have the opportunity of doing great things for heat exchange for buildings, and you are able to lower the cost of thermal plants, like in the city of New York. Con Ed obviously has a large thermal network in the lower portion of Manhattan, and it's very stable and firm power. And they're even looking at, going and getting hotter water from deeper sources in order to lower the cost of heating that for the thermal exchange. So what I had on my slides was I had a planimetric kind of viewpoint of New York, saying there are several aspects of where we have opportunities to really make up for, the loss of, let's say, if we were removing gas out of the network in certain places, like transitional places of gas use. In those places, you could, number one, it provides firm base load. Two, it provides transactional load opportunities of firming up the customer costs. And three, it's always on. So you can do heat exchange all day long, all night long. And I think from a standpoint, what Cornell University is doing, even though this is a very experimental and expensive well that they put up there, from a scientific viewpoint, it has great merit in that now you're creating a district heat load, which is really displacing all these point source means of carbon, like diesel generators. And so it's not just New York State that is looking at geothermal replacement, but Department of Defense, and all through areas where we have higher potential of hot springs, Arkansas, northeastern Arizona. And so the other aspects of this are, it doesn't have, if you were looking at, of course, the whole state of New York, it's very expensive, but at regional scaling, it can be paired in microgrids with solar and other means of energy storage like batteries. So anyway, the other thing I wanted to mention was we at EPRI are looking at solutions all across New York from, we have here in Governor's Island, Eva's here, Eva Gardeau, we have a energy storage project plus a indoor agriculture project, right? And so we're really here today to try and tie the knot a little bit and try to bring the R&D perspective into the state of New York, not only by NYSERDA work, but also by collaborative work with utilities and also the state government. So I think we're going to keep on time around 11. If I have the slides later, I'll give them to you, but maybe you can mail them out to everybody. So lastly, I'd just like to say thanks a lot for, I come all the way out from California where, one thing about New York, which is great, is you have a diverse, all of the above energy opportunity, which is great. And I think you have to take that into account to reach the state goals. I think I was up at Governor Hochul's meeting 2 weeks ago where we were talking about nuclear, because there's a lot of new work that's coming towards New York, a lot of new opportunities, semiconductor plants, all the AI work of the future. But in order to get there, I think it's going to take incremental change, like the geothermal example I gave you. And it can't be done all at once. It has to really be taken into account. So nuclear energy is a great thing. I know that we have great opportunities for, in the Inflation Reduction Act, to really transition a workforce, but this is going to take a little time. So I think looking at opportunities like geothermal and also microgridded areas that include storage and solar could really help some of the smaller cities around New York. So thanks a lot for your time. Thank you. All right, thanks.
Thanks.
Thank you, Andrew, and just want to again compliment EPRI on the work that you're doing. We have a real partnership. Sorry about the slides, but if people would like to maybe get copies later on, we'll work that out.
Welcome to the afternoon program. We're going to do a little bit of a panel here to talk about, and thanks a lot for everybody taking it seriously and going through their questions, because they were good and intriguing. Some of them were hard. So today I wanted to introduce our panel. We have Jane Shin, who's the Director of Strategic Planning at Con Ed, and then Mike Richter, who's the President of Brightcore Energy, and then next to Mike is Eva Gardeau. She's Program Manager at EPRI, and she's also the Board Chair for New York Best. And then over far away from me is Huck Montgomery, the Director of Policy and Strategy at National Grid. So if you can't hear us or sound quality is bad, just raise your hand. So I've got a lot of questions here. This time I have notes, and good thing. And we're going to go through these questions. I may pick out somebody to talk about it, but we're going to try and spearhead this. We have about 1 hour, right? And if somebody has a question also in the audience and wants a clarification, we'll try and keep this as open as possible. All right. First question I got, and I don't have which tables they were, so you probably know it on your own, but others might not. How can we best utilize emerging technologies to ensure disadvantaged communities aren't overburdened by the transition off the gas system? So this is a pretty big question that we now have across the United States. If you look in all the Infrastructure Act work, every piece of work really affects and is supposed to impact disadvantaged communities. And then when you look at all the hydrogen work going on, the big question is how can you create a better system for transition? So maybe we'll start with Jane, because you're right in the focus area in Con Ed with gas transition to electrification on the west side.
Right, thanks. And first of all, I wanted to thank everybody for coming, and the Advanced Energy Research and Technology Center for inviting us to join this conversation. I have to say I've come a long way from being a high school kid in the student action group trying to save the rainforests in the 90s, right? So I joined Con Edison 25 years ago, armed with a bachelor's of mechanical engineering, and I spent my time in and around the electric system throughout Con Edison, and picked up an MBA along the way. When I joined Con Edison, they were really at the forefront of environmental protection, right? And really had a lot of programs in place to hold harmless, right? So really make sure that anything we did not cause any negative impacts toward the environment, right? And things have come a long way since, right? So we've now are not just worrying about what our impact is, but we're really working to help our customers, right? To transition and really reduce their impact on the environment as well, right? And so, I think a lot of the conversation here is around transitioning the, customers that happen to have, a carbon footprint, and really trying to transition them and coming up with solutions, right? So, a lot of solutions include electrification, right? So, for some of the EJ communities, right, the challenges really are, it's a high capital cost to electrification, right? So Con Edison offers a host of incentive programs, right, to transition to heat pumps where it makes sense. And the other thing that we're looking at on the gas system is really trying to be strategic and thoughtful. We have a non-pipes alternative program as well. And really we're trying to look at areas, environmental justice areas that would benefit from these programs, and trying to find solutions for them. Because ultimately, as we strategically downsize the gas system, we have to look at really how do we manage that cost burden of that, that gas system, and maintaining that infrastructure that's going to, frankly, last quite a number of years, right? So it's going to take a while to wind down, right? It took us almost 100 years to wind down our DC electric distribution system, right? So it was in the 1915 timeframe where we said, all right, we're no longer DC distribution company, we're an AC electric distribution company. And it wasn't until the early aughts that we actually shut down the last DC customer, right? So from that learning, we'll know that the gas system might take a few years, but really trying to make sure we target our programs wisely.
That's great. Huck, anything you want to add to that?
Yeah, definitely. I agree with everything that Jane said. At National Grid, this is a big part of my role, working on the policy and regulatory frameworks that are going to be necessary to accomplish this objective, right? To decarbonize the energy that's currently served by the gas network, which is a massive amount of energy, right? And this is the biggest share of National Grid's Scope 3 greenhouse gas emissions, is our sold gas. The gas our customers use to stay warm in the winter, power their businesses. So, and just to give you a little bit of a sense of the scale of this, in New York City, our gas network delivers on its peak day in the winter about 3 times the amount of energy that the electric grid delivers on its peak day in the summer, 3 times. On Long Island, we've got about 3.5 gigawatts worth of energy being delivered by the gas network. The electric grid could meet about 5.5 gigawatts of that. It has the headroom, right, to handle that. So you could get there. The 3.5 gigawatts worth of electric load, okay, could go up to 5.5. There's enough headroom to do that. We've got something like 17 or 18 gigawatts of gas load on Long Island. So the electric grid's not even anywhere in the ballpark of what it could meet yet. So this is a major challenge, that there's not one single solution. There's not a single technological solution. Obviously the technologies, and sort of the focus of the question, are air source heat pumps. Targeted deployment of those. Energy efficiency is essential, right? You have to weatherize buildings and make sure we're using as little energy as we can to stay warm in the winter. Certainly district thermal energy systems like utility thermal energy networks have a really important role to play. And we know that in 2050, even in the most optimistic scenarios for deployment of these electric technologies, there's still going to be demand for fuel to heat buildings and industry. So we have the opportunity to use low carbon fuels like renewable natural gas or clean hydrogen to decarbonize the load that we're not able to electrify. So those are the technological solutions, but the real barriers are policy and regulatory frameworks, where we need transformative innovation to enable this to happen. And specifically for disadvantaged communities or DACs, the issue here is not just how clean is your energy? It's also what does it cost, right? An equitable transition is necessarily going to have to be an affordable transition. And we're not going to have a transition if it's not affordable and equitable, because it won't be durable, it won't be politically durable. So we have to work on bringing down the cost of all of those solutions that we were just talking about. And the key to that, overall, making sure you're not burdening these customers who are some of whom will remain on the gas network even in 2050 with increased costs, is the balancing, the right sizing of the gas network and the electric system. So there's a sweet spot of how many gas customers you can have and how many electric can convert to electric and still maintain the balance of cost, because as I pointed out earlier, if we were going to electrify all of the load that we currently serve through gas, that's 3 times or more energy from the electric side that you would need to expand. So that can be very costly, but at the same time, we know that we have to do that. We have to convert a lot of gas customers to electricity. So we need those tools to go do that while you manage the cost to remaining gas customers. So we want to avoid investing capital in new gas infrastructure to the extent you can, and transition customers over to electric. But we don't have the tools and policy to do that right now. We're obligated to serve customers when they want new gas. There are incentives in policy to expand gas service, and so what we have to do is figure out how to, I think there are solutions that are on the table that could be brought to bear, but it's going to take political action and action with policymakers and stakeholders to sort of come together to choose those pathways to accomplish this, because the barriers are really, really significant. It's a big part of the energy transition problem here, decarbonizing gas.
Well, thank you. That's very thorough answer. And Eva, real quick, from an energy storage perspective.
I just wanted to respond to
Yeah,
that question.
yeah, go ahead.
So I'm Eva Gardo. I'm so happy to be here, and thank you for being here too. I'm with EPRI, working with Andy, but prior to that I was with a large electric utility for 25 years and worked developing fuel cells and nuclear plants prior to that. And I'm bringing all of that experience to working on the clean energy transition. And part of that clean energy transition is to really work to support the disadvantaged communities. And as I think most of you know, there's been a lot of funding from the federal government, and all of those projects are requiring community benefits plans. And they are really asking for us to work and develop those seriously and not just give them lip service. But it goes beyond that. It needs to become embedded in all of the development within the cities and the states and the utilities to really have all the different departments understand the importance of that, not just a small group over here that's working on environmental justice. There's training and information that needs to be developed within all these companies and organizations and governments so that it is part of everyday thinking in order to ensure that we provide clean and equitably to all our communities.
Thanks, Eva. Yeah, you want to go ahead.
Following up on that, my name is Mike Richter with Brightcore Energy, and we deploy lighting, solar, and geothermal. We love geothermal, but one of the things that we're getting very excited about in terms of economic justice is these thermal loops, as you mentioned, Huck. We're looking at a project in DC right now. That's a former freed slave colony. This is an environmental, an economic justice area, and they enfranchise people that otherwise would be priced out of this marketplace. We'd love everybody to have a Tesla. Not everybody has $100,000 to plop on an electric vehicle. The pushback on solar initially was Leonardo DiCaprio can do it on his third home. Well, what about everybody else? And this now enfranchises everybody to be part of literally a loop that has massive efficiency benefits. And so it does bring in areas that otherwise would be left out of this conversation. So we're super excited by that. And the utilities across the board have been incredibly supportive. So that's something to think about going forward.
Okay, let's pivot over to, maybe we'll kick off with you again, Mike. And this question is kind of interesting. This one's really talking about, I'm going to kind of put these two together a little bit, but and we have questions all over the map, and because we had so many different ideas out there, but the questions came up around workforce, and they came out talking about how do you build a workforce for future technologies without training people in jobs that really don't exist? Think of offshore wind, right? And think about high voltage direct current coming in. You have to redevelop switching stations right in the core of some of the work you do now. And you think about all these new technologies coming in, you could even develop manufacturing for that HVDC, or even have here in Long Island, or in Long Island be the service community for all of offshore wind, easily transporting things. So how do you get that? How do you look at the workforce issue and working with your utility customers? And how can we better educate, and figure out from a contractor type of perspective how we can meet those needs given looking over the horizon? Go ahead, yes.
I can start. I mean, with the Inflation Reduction Act, it's a requirement to have an apprenticeship program. And we can, as a company, go out and buy all the rigs you want, but we need skilled labor to be able to run them, and that is a choke point. It's a huge choke point for us. So we are, it's self-interest to educate as many people as possible about the benefits of this. These are great paying jobs. They are highly skilled, and they're long-term. And so we participate in this all the time, and it is a requirement of the IRA. So I think it's getting people to understand we have to get that dam broken. Massively important.
Okay. Anybody else?
Yeah, and
utility side?
Sure. So, obviously, the utility industry has been around a long time, and we've transitioned and pivoted in the past, right? So, once upon a time, we were really a gas company, and we picked up electric along the way. The way of generating that electricity changed over the years, right? And so, coal versus oil versus gas, right? So it's really gotten cleaner each step of the way. And now it's really looking at new generation sources, right? So obviously renewable solar as well as wind is, not necessarily utility employees because of deregulation in the state. That being said, right, the industry has changed and developed these new skills, right? And really it's, to Mike's point about understanding the industry, right? So being a part of that industry, understanding the industry, understanding how, the systems interact, right? So developing that foundation. So, we have at Con Edison in Long Island City a learning center that we have, that we built, and we have a lot of people come through there and train, and we reskill our employees, right? So we reskill them, we have to pivot and adjust. So really it's getting the right mindset. It's getting people who care, right? So in any industry, right, you're not hiring a person that already does the job in many cases, right? It's not that they already do it, but they have the capacity for it. They understand it. And so really what we're doing is we're bringing in and we're looking to bolster our workforce. Con Edison has about 14,000 employees, 80% of which live in our service territory, between New York City and Westchester. So really we employ a lot of New Yorkers, right? And we're looking to, we anticipate a large growth on the electric side, right? And the renewable side and the storage side, right? So battery storage as well. So it's really bringing those people in and having the foundation so that they could learn the nuance, right? We hired, this is probably going back like 5-ish years ago. It was a few years before COVID, right? We developed a data scientist team, right? So we hired a slew of data scientists because we understood that this was a skill that was necessary in our industry. And guess what? They knew nothing about the utility space, but they had to learn, right? So over the now we have experts who are data scientists who truly understand the utility business as well. Maybe not truly understand it, but they can speak the language and we can work together, right? So we, as a utility, we're constantly pivoting and changing and adjusting our workforce.
Yeah,
Go ahead, Eva.
Thank you. So, your workforce training is a bit of a conundrum when you're looking down the clean energy future road, because there are a lot of unknown jobs and opportunities. And so one of the things we're doing at EPRI is recognizing that a lot of our research activity and our programs are looking at beyond the 3-5 years and like where we're going to do. And what we've been developing over the last several years is our courses that can be pulled down from our EPRI website that help provide the understanding for the new technologies and how they can be used. And we're continuing to develop that curriculum and those syllabuses. But when it comes right down to repeat what Jane was saying is the electric industry is probably, if not the most complicated industry in the world, one of the most complicated. And to really understand it and navigate that does take some fundamentals. And I think about the education that I had in elementary and high school and what my children had, and there's really very little information and coursework on electricity. We really need to work to get some more into the elementary and high school, because they just come to expect it. Flip the switch and there it is, right? And we really can't do anything or very little without power. We really need to have it to be there when you need it.
I just want to jump in and one thing that I think for us and across the board is the most important thing we can focus on is partnerships with organized labor. The organizations actually represent the workers, and so that's really important, whether it's the unions that represent the utility workers, like the IBEW for us here, the steel workers or utility workers, but also the building trades, the laborers, and the IBEW, the UA, the plumbers. Across the board, these are organizations that run their own really super advanced apprenticeship programs, right? These are, it's a really, really valuable workforce that's really robust in New York State. And we need to be listening to those workers, right? And listening to them in terms of what are their capabilities and what are the barriers. I think too often we think about, what do we do to build the workforce? Well, this apparatus exists, right? That's what our unions do. And they're really, really capable, and we need to make sure we're, good partners as management, as government for those workers, because they can do anything, right? We can have a workforce that's ready for the future. We just need to make sure we're investing in and listening to these leaders, these organizations that represent the workforce. I think that's a really essential piece of the transition is going to be working closely with organized labor.
I'd just add, as much as the need is there, I think the excitement is there. Anecdotally, people that we've plucked from the fracking industry, for example, it doesn't translate perfectly, but it does translate, and they are thrilled. They're mission-driven, and they are looking for opportunities like this. And so, I'm speaking right now to Stony Brook about bolstering our ability to teach our own group. It is the choke point, and these people are fired up, and the jobs aren't sometime in the future, they're right now.
It's good. I'm going to transition over to new energy technologies, a little bit of discussion. We had a couple of questions or a couple of answers that were filled out, and I'm going to try to deploy this so that everybody can participate here. So typically, we see a lot of new technologies for the grid. As you know, there's lots out there for different purposes. And some, technologies only get deployed at the local level sometimes. So the question comes in is how can utilities, how can they prime the pump for broadening and scaling technology adoption? And sometimes local communities, even though codes and standards exist, there's a propensity not to adopt, whether it's a NIMBY issue, or it could be that, there's some educational gap you have to resolve, to teach people that, battery fires are existent because of maybe integration issues. Sometimes it could be the equipment, but how do you get over that gap? What can utilities do in this case? And I guess you can answer too, even from the research side, where we can kind of scale up on new technologies so that the electrification takes place faster in some cases, or it could be more battery storage, or it could be other technologies. But we used at the table I was on, how much. There's only been 300 megawatts of deployment of energy storage, right? But they got a 6 gigawatt target. How do you scale quickly? What can the utilities do in that case to thread that needle? And of course, regulators want that closed very quickly. So there's lots of issues. So go ahead, kick it off.
I think the secret of this is going to be really compelling product offerings to the customers from the utilities. So you can actually give customers something that they want. Customers aren't going to adopt a technology that is more expensive and less reliable and generates, a customer experience that isn't what they're looking for. So obviously we have to send the right price signals. So there's sort of a rate design and kind of a regulatory, structure that needs to come into this, but the utilities need to focus on delivering really high quality product offerings to their customers that customers want to choose the option that will have the lowest carbon intensity, that'll have the beneficial effect we're trying to achieve at a system scale. So I think it comes down to, there's a marketing component of that, and there's the sort of actual product design offering. As an example from my former employer, Liberty Utilities, and we built a customer battery storage partnership program where essentially customers would pay a lease, essentially lease their Tesla Powerwall batteries for a small monthly fee from the utility. The utility owned the batteries and could dispatch the batteries on the peak days to shave peak and shave the cost of transmission capacity for those days and pass those costs on to all customers. And the customers who hosted the batteries could arbitrage the power market. This was coupled with a time of use rate. Customers loved it. It was just a great thing, because if you had solar, you could charge your batteries on your solar and dispatch it to the grid. It benefited the customers that had the batteries, but also the customers that didn't, because we were shaving peak and costs for everybody. So it's the kind of thing that we can do across the board, come up with really compelling product offerings that customers want to adopt, that they see the value in it. Because if the energy transition just looks like more expensive, less reliable, less comfortable, people aren't going to adopt it. Customer propensity has to be, is the real barrier. And I think we can bring products to customers that they'll want. That's what the focus needs to be.
So I just wanted to take the perspective from the utility and utility adopting and using new technologies. And there are things that are being done federally, as well as, academically, through EPRI and through the state. So specifically with EPRI, most of our research programs have an aspect to be able to look to see and work with developing companies and technologies, so that EPRI takes the job to kind of vet these technologies and then share them with the utility members across the country and around the world, so that based on the specific situation of the utility or the state that they operate in, they can adopt those technologies. So we help curate some of those technologies so that they can be utility ready. And that includes working with the vendors themselves to provide feedback to have them understand the electric utility industry, and in order to have those products that can be ready and deployable when they need to. But specifically in New York, the New York Public Service Commission put out an order, I think it was like 2.5 years ago, really requiring the collective of the utilities, the joint utilities in New York, to specifically look at advanced technologies. And they developed a working group, and they identified 3 technologies originally, which included energy storage, dynamic line rating, and now they are in the process, after 2.5 years now, expanding those different technologies to understand them. And this joint utilities group has put out an RFP to have developing emerging technology companies submit their technologies, so that the utilities can understand them, know where they are, and then work to pilot them and then move them into everyday use when they are ready for it. And that includes, not only energy storage technologies, but hydrogen companies, voltage management technologies. And so there is really a very strong effort here in New York to have the utilities understand and know the technologies that are being developed to really be able to support the clean energy future.
Yeah, I'd just add to that. As a vendor of one of these technologies, we have found across the board the utilities to be incredibly agile and open-minded, which is not something you usually have in a sentence with utilities. People love to hate them for all kinds of reasons.
It's true.
Honest to God, not Grid, Con Ed up here on the stage, but across the board, we have had a conversation that's been more of a partnership. And as an example, one of the things we do is test boreholes. If you decide that you want to have a geothermal field, you're going to have to see what the thermal conductivity is. It can be thousands and tens of thousands of dollars. It can be anywhere from $30,000 to $100,000. That's a big leap. That's a big commitment before you even know whether you can do it. Con Ed developed a program, and we said, hey, this is a problem. They said we can cover some of this cost. So it's the incentives that you're talking about. It's working hand in glove and getting feedback from the clients and the people trying to put it in the ground. It's been amazing to watch. So I would say it's moving in the right direction.
Mm-hmm. I echo all these thoughts, and I do, and you mentioned sort of the need for technology innovation, right? I will say that we're open to conversation and ideas, right? And I think that's important for folks to understand is that, Con Edison has engaged a great deal with the external communities, right? So we really do partner with a lot of the distributed energy resource organizations, the EV organizations, the solar energy organizations, right? So we really are trying to partner with them to understand how can we better deploy these solutions in our service territory, right? And so, tied to the pilots, right, Eva mentioned, right? So again, we're open to piloting new technologies, right? I will say in the late 90s, we were probably one of the earliest utilities to incorporate a fuel cell on our system, right? Where we were the first utility to allow backfeed onto the mesh network, right? So, from DERs, right, distributed energy resources. And so, we're open to it, we pilot things, we want to make sure that it works on the system as a whole. Are we a little slow about mass adoption? Probably, but we're very open to innovation. A lot of us are, scientists that are curious to see how this will work. How can we come up with solutions? We're really, involved with that. I will say specifically trying to encourage adoption in the New York area. We have a lot of incentive programs, right? So we have make-ready programs, right? So really we're trying to take that burden, that cost burden off that individual customer. And if you want to install an EV charger at your home, right, and that's a cost that you're willing to bear, but you're not willing to bear the cost of upgrading your electric panel, for example, right? We have a make-ready program where we will cover the cost of that electric panel upgrade to encourage that customer, right? And now we just started the make-ready program for home heating as well. So that's a new program that we have available, right? And so these are things, we had the heat pump rebates for a while as well. I think that's still going on after a little bit of a hiccup. Ran out of money, but that's okay. That shows how popular it was, right? And so, we're open to it. We're trying different things. Let me see, there was one other thing that I wanted to mention, but again, it'll come to me. But absolutely, we want to encourage this, right? So that's it for now.
Let me continue with this thread for a second, but let me interject. So what catches the attention of the utility, or in this case also EPRI? So let's say you're a startup and you're out there and you have a new technology. It may be scalable, it may be something, or even to you too, Mike. How do you go about, if you're a startup, catching your attention? Is it getting having a grant from NYSERDA? Is it having a cost-benefit analysis ready to go that somebody can see? Is it proof of technology? Is it what? A real quick answer. What do you think gets you over the hurdle of bringing in new technology? Like whether you're at New York Best, bringing something forward, whether you're trying it out in the field because it's risky, right? So let's start with. Let's start with Huck. What gets you over the hump to talk to you at National Grid?
I think it's got to be, obviously, you need to have some proven technology, something that goes beyond just the conceptual stage. There's a lot of cool stuff going on. We want to keep track of it. We've got a lot of relationships with startups that are doing stuff more foundational work, but to get it into a utility pilot or demonstration project, you need to see that proven technology. And I think the most important thing is like a path to scale that'll deliver value for our customers, because everything, all of this is going to be paid for by the customers, right? That's who's putting up the money. And if we can't bring that value to customers so they can actually realize it, then they're not going to move forward with in that direction. They're not going to adopt that technology. So that path to scale and providing value is probably most important for us, to be able to really demonstrate that you can get from that. If we do a pilot, if we do a demonstration project, we have an idea of what we'll be able to prove out that we could then take to the commission to say, all right, here's the path that we can integrate this into our plans and make this happen. And we want to see that provable. We want to be able to prove out scale.
Right, absolutely, I agree. It's the scalability, right? So you need, new technology is great and it's interesting and a lot of us are curious and we want to try it out, but realistically it's not going to go beyond the pilot unless we can prove that it's scalable and it's beneficial for our customers, right? So ultimately that's where we have to, be really critical and thoughtful about, all right, where do we move forward, right? So we can conduct the pilot. And the reason for the pilot is so that we could prove out that business case, right? That's what the pilot, you may not necessarily have all the numbers sorted out, right? But you need to be able to, present a position where we could see a path forward, right? We're not going to pilot a technology that's helpful for 5 people, right? We want it to be helpful to all of our customers in some way, shape, or form. So that's really, I agree, scalability is super key.
Can I just supplement that too, real quick? If I was going to give advice to a startup that had a technology that they wanted to, get involved, get a utility involved in demonstrating, they should really focus on what is the business case within the utility regulatory model, the way it exists today, or the way it could reasonably, feasibly exist in the near future. It is what it is. It's a big edifice, the regulatory framework and the policies that they operate under, and it's complicated. So you need to understand the regulatory framework and at least have a sense of the history of the last decade or so of where we've been and where we've gone. So you could say, well, maybe we couldn't do it under today's framework, but there is a way to get to a regulatory framework that could help us take our product to scale and have an idea of what that might be. Because you get a lot of stuff that brought to your door and you're like, well, yeah, but that just doesn't work that way, right? So if you're a startup, you might want to, find some folks that really understand the regulatory environment and where we've been and where we're going so you can try to make that business case.
Yeah, and there's, the startups really need to understand the process of development, and there's a lot of tools and programs to be able to support, the growth and the development. So, I'm sure most of you have heard of DARPA, which then, because DARPA was so successful, they started ARPA-E, and then ARPA-E and DARPA developed this technology readiness scale, so there's 1 through 10 technology readiness level, and academics and some of the federal governments usually fund and support technology readiness level like through 4, and so like EPRI really works with technologies, technology readiness with 4 to 10, but the thing is we need to go to scalability and to go from pre-commercial beyond to full commercial. And so the Department of Energy has developed now the adoption readiness level. There's also the manufacturing level, readiness level, and all of these things. There are organizations that can help fund. So, for example, EPRI has the Incubate Energy program, where every year we put out a calling, and I think it's just about to open. It's a year-long program. So you can give your pitch, and then if any of the utilities that are in this program want to test it, then you get chosen, and you have an opportunity to do to show off your technology and how it can scale and how it can be used. And it's really everything from software to hardware, but the business practices need to match the regulatory framework, as Huck had mentioned. But then there's several other organizations. There's a lot of funding right now from the federals through the BIL and the IRA, and then here in New York State we have NYSERDA, which is an amazing organization that we're fortunate to have Richard here. So they help really work with all the local companies and other companies that can support the industry and the infrastructure in New York. And all of those are opportunities to help move these technologies, into everyday use.
Okay. All right, Bob tells me we've got a 5-minute lightning round question, so I'm going to go do it for you. So I'm going to sum up this one. I'm going to try and, I've got several questions left here, but when you think about the grid in the state of New York, we've all heard this discussion that we're going to have double the capacity issues coming up. We have offshore wind, of course, coming in. We've heard from Governor Hochul 3 weeks ago about this new look at nuclear power. All this has got to get integrated, of course, and then we talk about, transmission through the state and how that's going to work. In your opinion, from where you work, what needs to happen from your perspective to, where do we attack this first, from a policy perspective, or is it like we've been talking about technologies? Is there some type of, approval process that needs to take place to accelerate? We'll have all these data centers, chip makers. What has to happen first from your mind? Just looking over the horizon, what can we gather from you, from where you work, how you see this transition taking place?
I think what has to happen first is we need to agree on a mechanism that we can actually assess the emissions impact of the deployment of a particular technology in a particular circumstance, that we can all agree on and say, yes, if we install a heat pump here, or if we make a transmission upgrade there, or if we procure a decatherm of RNG from over here, clean hydrogen from over there, what's that worth to climate? And then we can figure out, once we have that established, then you can figure out what are the mechanisms to incentivize the things that you want to do. And there are some things kicking around, right, on that side. NYC, New York Cap and Invest, will be a really important tool. There are, right now, several proceedings going on at the PSC around the gas transition. There's a lot going on in terms of transmission development. There's no transition without transmission, right? But until we can come together around a framework to say this is what the emissions benefits of this action are, we're not going to be able to tackle that next big problem, which is, okay, who pays for it then, right? Because the cost can't be concentrated just on, say, gas customers or just electric customers, and we have to have those mechanisms in place. But unless we know what something's worth in terms of its emissions, so we advocate for it and think it's a really smart thing to do, to embed life cycle emissions accounting across the board throughout all of the decision-making processes on the energy transition. So you're looking at upstream and downstream emissions associated with the energy decision, embedded carbon, upstream emissions, and site-specific emissions. But we need that tool first before we can really do anything. We have to be you have to measure it to manage it. So we don't have that in New York right now. We don't have a single, easy to understand, straightforward way to assess the emissions impact of something, and we need that.
That's good. Eva, what's your over-the-horizon view, real quick?
Well, I think that, here in the United States, and specifically here in New York, we have some phenomenal public-private partnerships that include government, R&D organizations, academics, and industry. And we really need to work to hone those and maintain those and grow them. We're very fortunate with the New York Climate Exchange and the initiation of that organization that really brought us together here and has brought together so many different organizations, the New York Mayor's Office, New York Best, and all of these organizations are really important to bring them together, to have conversations, to make sure that we're on the same path so that we can get to our clean energy future. It's really important that you're all here and that we then take it back and continue the discussion, the dialogue, so that we can move the correct policies and technologies into place.
Mike, you got a tough job because you got to answer to everybody in your job. So, what's your wise advice?
I would just say, it's been said that the cleanest electron is the one you don't use. So we really do focus on diminishing the demand, and you have to have both. You have to have new clean energy electrons coming into the grid. You said it great, Huck. I mean, we don't have the capacity to have everybody drive an electric car and everybody be in an electric building. So we're going to have to start being more efficient with the electrons that we do have, and that's what we're focused on. So.
Yeah, and I'm going to kind of bring it back a little bit to, I think, what Huck mentioned in the first question, the first response, is really, the cost, right? So we have to really come to grips and be honest with each other that it's if we want something enough, we have to make some sacrifice, right? And that's that cost. Is it a energy efficiency choice where we live a little differently, right? So that we can reduce that demand. And is it, do we talk to each other about, well, what are the technology solutions? What are the optimal solutions as we find that, strike that balance between electric, gas, and steam systems, right? So we have different systems, different energy systems available to us. How do we balance that? How do we come up with an optimal solution? It really has a lot to do with, as Ava mentioned, the conversation, right? So really it's the partnership. So I think about, Con Edison knows we can't, we need everybody's help, right? We need everybody in this together. It's sort of an all-in solution. So ultimately, it is really communicating with each other and talking to everybody, even the wrong people, right? Not all the right people, but even the wrong people, so that we can get to the right answer, right? Because ultimately, that's how the optimal solution comes about, right? Because we want to come to a lowest cost solution for all, right? Really, it's going to cost something, but let's try to make it as painless as possible. So that's kind of where, we're looking.
That's good advice.
Let's give a round of applause.